Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is the weekly podcast for all your tillage news and advice. In this episode, we'll be discussing soil fertility and soil sampling with Dr. Veronica Nyham from Teagasc in Portlaoise. I first asked Veronica, why is soil sampling so important?
It's been an extremely difficult year, and margins are going to be very tight, if existent at all. So I suppose soil fertility is one area that we can manage and can maximise, and soil sampling really is the first step to soil fertility management. So why this time of year? Well, basically, for some practical reasons, it's a long time now since March when the last PK application was made. So we'll be getting a good baseline fertility figure if we take a soil sample now. The soil condition suits soil sampling. The soil shouldn't be too wet or too dry, although we've had 2 storms, so I can't speak across the whole country, but it should be good to take practically take the soil sample. And really, as you said, it's the kind of the start of the year. So if you're sowing winter cereals, it's a great time to figure out if lime is required, because that will go into the seed bed. There's also an allowance if you have really low P index 1 or 2 soils for getting phosphorus into the seed bed, because it's very important for plant root development. So it's great from that perspective. Finally, I always feel this is a great month for soil management across the board, because you're fresh out of the harvest. You're very aware of the parts of your fields that may have underperformed. So it's a great time if you wanted to do targeting soil sample for a specific area within a field. And also just to do a quick dig and maybe look at your soil profile a bit, compaction, root density. It's ideally the time to do all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so guys, they're probably going to be under a little bit of pressure. They're finishing off the harvest at the moment. They may well have plans to put out organic manures, or perhaps apply P's and K's to the stubbles before they sow the crop in. If a guy was under pressure and he's trying to do all that bit of work, soil sampling is something extra, something else to be done. Can he not just leave the soil sample and do all that work, if you like, and leave the soil sample and do the soil sample in maybe December, January, when there's a bit more time, and kind of see where it is then? Can that be done? Is there a disadvantage to doing that, or is it really necessary that it needs to be done this time of the year?
Well, if you are putting out manures, organic manures, you can't really soil sample later on in the year, because you really need to leave the soil for a period of between 3 and 6 months, and the longer the better, because the result will come back high for the P and K. It won't give you a realistic figure of what's in the soil and what needs to be addressed. It'd be a false high, so to speak. Also, generally speaking, when you're taking soil samples, we recommend you do it consistently at the same time of the year. So post-harvest suits the tillage system. And again, as I said, like as the soil gets wetter later on in the year, it's harder to take the sample. And what you find happens is when you put the core in, you won't get the 10 centimeter depth, which we want to give a representative of where the rooting structure it takes the nutrients from. Also, you'll just find you start picking the dry spots of the field and sampling them excessively, and you're not getting a representative sample. So really, if you're not putting out, if you're spring cereals and you're not putting anything into the crop over the winter, and you're not fertilizing it, there is no reason why you can't. And most grassland farmers would sampler later in the year, but it just suits the tillage system to go post harvest.
And again, it can often, I suppose, slip people's minds, and 1 year kind of blends into the next. As regards, soil samples can get old very quickly. What are the actual requirements under nitrates as regards how often you should take them, and size of area that should be included in a soil sample?
Well, I suppose the first thing to say, is that there's no legal it's not mandatory under the nitrates directive to soil sample. Basically, if you aren't going to soil sample, the only thing the department does state is that you have to treat your soils as being at optimum fertility, which is, we call an index 3. And that means you can only apply a maintenance dressing. The reality is over 50% of Irish tillage soils are in index 1 or 2, which is low or very low for phosphorus. So if you are following those guidelines, you will be under fertilizing your crop, and you're going to see a problem in yield. And also it's creating an ongoing problem because you're draining an already poorly resourced area. If you are soil sampling, the nitrates directive states that a soil sample is valid for 4 years, except ones that have a very high phosphorus reading on them, and they cannot represent an area of more than 5 hectares. So that's 5 hectares per sample box, and 4 years per sample. Now, a lot of gloss farmers will probably be hitting that 4-year mark now, so it's a good time to be looking and thinking about soil sampling this year.
Okay, so when the soil sample comes back, lime is probably one of the first things that you would look to see whether you need lime or not, as a crop is not in the ground. But how much, give or take, I suppose, with all the various different soils that are out there, how much does lime drop from year to year on a typical soil?
Well, I suppose the simple answer is a lot, and probably more than people realize. There's a number of things that influence the level in the soil and how soil acidifies. Crop offtake is actually probably the smallest of all the factors. Generally, say a 3 ton to the acre crop of spring barley or 4 ton of winter wheat, you're talking somewhere in the region of 4 to 60 kgs to the acre. But really the big killers for lime is rainfall. So if you're over an acidic parent material in a high rainfall area, and especially if you have a light free draining soil, the loss is significant year on year. And again, when you put nitrogen fertilizers out, they're acidifying the soil. So for every kg of nitrogen you're putting out, you're creating a need for 2 kgs of lime to neutralize the acidity created. When you add the 3 factors together, really you're talking about somewhere in the region of over 5 years about a need for about 1.5 to 2.5 tons of lime per acre, and that's a maintenance dressing. So really a soil report is critical, because if you're in these high rainfall areas, you're on the high end of that, the 2.5 ton, and you wouldn't want to be missing your target. So also, just contacting your advisor, they'd be very familiar with the soils in your area, and talking to them, it's a good idea just to figure out where your base level or where the draw is on your line.
Okay, and I suppose previous soil samples will give you an indication if they're categorized over the last, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. They give you an idea how much lime went on and where the pH is going.
Definitely, yeah. But if you're new to soil sampling, yeah, lime is the master variable. It cannot be overstated how critical it is to impacting other aspects of the soil. So yeah, soil sampling is the first thing you check when you look at a soil report.
And when you talk about obviously it's a very critical factor, lime, and when we kind of bring in the nutrient efficiency, obviously farmers spend an awful lot of money on nitrogen, and phosphorus being the next most expensive one, or probably the most expensive one. If you have a relatively low pH status, or it needs a lot of lime, how much does that affect the efficiency of the uptake of nitrogen or phosphorus to a plant?
Well, the pH of the soil influences a whole load of things, not just the fertility or the nutrients in the soil. It affects things like soil biology and soil structure as well. I should state that before we go anywhere. But when it comes to the actual nutrients itself, all of them get influenced by the pH status of the soil. The most sensitive is phosphorus, and it's also your most expensive. So it's the one we probably talk about the most. When you start dropping below a pH of 6 or going above a pH of 7, very quickly the phosphorus levels in the soil, the phosphorus in the soil changes its chemistry. It starts to bind with things like iron and aluminium or calcium when the soil is basic. And basically it goes from being in a form that is usable by the plant to being unusable, and that happens really, really quick. So that's why we talk about a pH optimum of around the 6.5, ranging from 6.3 to 7, depending on what you're growing in the field. But essentially all the macronutrients do the same thing, maybe not as quickly or not as severely as the phosphorus. But when the pH starts to drop below 6 and 5.7 and down towards that area, all the macronutrients, and these are the ones the crop needs the most, become less available. At the same time, the micronutrients, the things that the crops need in small quantities, they actually become more available. And we get to the point where we're after creating now an environment that doesn't suit the biology of the plant. The nutrients they want in large amounts are becoming less available, and things that they don't want too much of are becoming more available. So that's why we call it the master variable. When we go to the upper end, again, phosphorus very quickly above pH 7 becomes unavailable or less available as it binds with calcium. And our trace elements there, so the ones that we test for in tillage systems, manganese, copper, zinc, those also start to get interfered with and become less available to the crop.
Holy moly, Jesus! As you say, pH is the master variable for sure, and I think most farmers probably understand it, but certainly not in the detail or after outlining there. So you know, it's something people just really need to keep on top of. And like I say, it is a very busy time out there. Farmers are flat out between trying to harvest remaining crops and tidy up straw and that kind of thing. So it is very, very busy for farmers. Can Teagasc help in terms of trying to help farmers get those soil tests taken at the moment?
Absolutely. So basically, we have soil samplers who will literally come out and take the soil sample for you. It's part of the pricing. So when you pay for the soil sample, that's included in the prices that are on the Teagasc website. I would strongly recommend, though, if you're starting soil sampling from scratch, I would consult your advisor before you get to that stage, because it's an underestimated part of the process, but mapping your soils or mapping your fields correctly to the soil type and you know, the performance level and the cropping history is critical as well. So I think the farmer knows the soils, but their Teagasc advisor will be able to access information like, is there peat layer in it that the department recognizes, and these kind of things. So engage with your advisor and draw up maps using, you know, a system both that you understand, and then we can provide a sampler who come out using the maps, take the samples, will process them and send them on and give you back your results.
Okay, and when you talk about the results coming back out the far side, obviously a major part of that is interpreting the results and making them, I suppose, real for the farmer. Teagasc have a nutrient management plan or a major program, NNP Online. How can that help a farmer if everything comes back and he gets that kind of nice plan? How does that help the farmer in the management of his farm thereafter?
Well, the nutrient management plan, I think, is probably one of our most underused resources. It is exactly that, a plan. So what we do is we take the soil fertility results. We also consult with the farmer on the land use, if there's stock in the farm, what types, the quantities. We look at things of the soil type and things like bonus yield. So if you have fields that are producing very high yields, then they need to be fertilized to a slightly higher level. We use all these and we put them into this nutrient management plan program. And from that, then we will get a breakdown of your soil fertility. So part of the report that you'll get as a farmer will talk you through what percentage of your soils are at optimum fertility, what are suboptimum, and in what nutrient they're suboptimum. It also will give you your overall fertilizer requirement for the year. The maximum that the department will penalise you if you go above, but also the recommended, which is for good practice, what you should be buying. That creates flexibility for you in your buying, so you can start buying fertilizer when it's maybe cheaper to buy and it helps with margin. And then finally, what we can do is actually go field by field through the farm and look at each individual parcel, how it's performing and what fertility it needs, and put a plan in place where you could drive out into the field and know, well, this needs whatever compound and whatever nitrogen, and have it. And there's a mapping system as well that can be used, so you can actually have these maps with you in the tractor as you go around the farm, helping you or guiding you to maximize your fertility on a field by field level. So it's a brilliant program when it's used proactively. I suppose historically it's probably more reactively, in that people only engage with it when they get an inspection and they want to know, have they gone over? But if you use it looking ahead rather than back, it can be very, very helpful.
Veronica, that is fantastic, and thanks very much for that quick update, I might say. So look, thanks again, and hopefully we'll be chatting to you again.
Okay, thanks.
Before we go, I want to tell you about an event that's happening next week. Each year over the past number of years, the Crops Forum has taken place in early September to update growers on the latest varieties and agronomic issues, which the industry should be aware of before the end of the year. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, we can't run this as normal and have decided to run it as a virtual meeting over the Zoom platform. The forum will be in two parts. The first one covering varieties and agronomy, and the second part covering policy issues and how the industry can develop over the next number of years. The first part of the forum will take place next Thursday, September the 10th, between 6:30 and 7:30 p.m. over Zoom, and all the details on how to register for the forum are available at www.teagasc.ie/events. Registration only takes a few seconds, and the system will remind you a couple of times before the forum starts so you don't miss anything. So as mentioned, the first part of the forum will be discussing new varieties with the Department of Agriculture. This year has been a very difficult year, but interesting in terms of how varieties of winter wheat, barley and oats have performed. And this information should feed into your decision making about the mix of varieties you'll plant this year. Varieties contain a lot of built-in technology, and we have Tim O'Donovan from CTech who will talk about how BYDV tolerance and resistance are being incorporated into varieties and how these varieties should be best managed through the season. Finally, on the evening, Shay Phelan from Teagasc will discuss how to plan a profitable rotation. As we know, farmers with good rotations have got the highest yields over the last number of years, so it's important to listen to this end of it. And he'll also touch on some of the important agronomic points for the year. So mark the day in your diary for Thursday, September the 10th at 6:30 and register online as soon as you can. And finally, the second part of the forum will take place on the following Thursday, September the 17th, which is this Thursday fortnight. And more information on this event is available at teagasc.ie/events. That's it for the Tillage Edge this week, and my thanks to Veronica for joining me on the podcast. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more farming information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.